So there are many different ways that some of my episodes are described in the comments. Just like last Friday's episode where I said, this is the landing system that I suggested. And some people kind of laughed at that. And I was like, no, that's the landing system that I suggested. The previous landing system that we had that had the 3D model of the ship. And if you paid attention, CIG said the exact same thing, was based on a fixed asset. It wasn't a landing system that reacted dynamically to whatever environment you're trying to land on. And the system that they were describing in the future that they would like to implement was one that read the terrain beneath you and gave you a 3D model of that, which is exactly what I described over a year ago, in fact, March of last year, in an episode called Landing in the Dark. But aside from that, also hearing that one of my episodes was described as heartwarming and life-affirming, man, you guys are different sometimes. Heartwarming and life-affirming. I honestly, that is the most unexpected but happy comment I have ever seen on one of my videos. But let's move on. So, landing systems. Obviously, we kind of touched on that a little bit in the very beginning, and it is something that I kind of want to get into in terms of the new hover system. Tilting your ship to go forward, tilting your ship to go back, that sort of thing. I think that what CIG is going for, and one of the things that they've talked about is obviously that it looks more real when a ship kind of tilts forward to go forward, tilts back to go back, right to right, left to left. Because for us, for human beings from the 21st and the late 20th century, this is aircraft are our closest realistic reference to these spaceships. And so that's kind of what makes sense to our 21st and 20th century brains, right? Tilt to go forward, tilt to go back, just like a helicopter, that sort of thing. That's what makes the most sense to us. But I think that the reality is, it's like a lot of the things in this game. I think the reality of the game, it traps CIG in certain places, just as sometimes we as players are trapped. Like, we might look at a ship and say, oh, this cockpit needs to be changed, or this, so we can help see when we're landing. But then CIG says, well, a compromise would be, rather than redesigning the interiors of all the ships, we create this 3D landing system that shows you the terrain underneath you, and then you use that tool, and that's a compromise that allows us to maintain the ships that we've already designed without having to go back to the drawing board, and it allows you the ability, it gives you the tools that you need to navigate within that game environment. That's a compromise, and I think that it's a good compromise, and it's a solid compromise. The hover system, however, I think it kind of is in conflict with the overall landing system in terms of the internalized landing bays that we have within the game. It's in conflict with that because these are obviously these closed environments that you land down into, or sideways you side slip into them, and that enclosed bay with its closing doors exists. You might think, oh man, this looks really cool and sci-fi and all this, but you may not understand really why that's there. The reason why those landing bays are enclosed is so when someone calls up their ship and it winks into existence within that landing bay, you don't actually see that happen, because that would break immersion. You're led to believe that your ship exists in some kind of like vending machine underground or somewhere within the space station, and that it's slowly brought out with a mechanical arm on a landing bay platter and just placed there, and you don't see it happening. So it doesn't break your immersion for that ship to all of a sudden wink into existence. It's stored, and I'm doing air quotes while I'm saying that, hidden away somewhere in the space station in the guts, and then it's brought up when you call it up. That's why we have these tight little enclosed landing bays. And that's why Port Olisar also has to go, because it doesn't provide that facility. That's why we're getting all these new stations, because they provide that facility, whereas Port Olisar doesn't. You see the spaceship just blink into existence right in front of you. And that's not very immersive, right? And that's one of the things that we're trying to maintain. The problem with the new hover mode is that because those environments are enclosed the way they are, it makes the new hover mode kind of come into conflict with that. Because even though, having to tilt this way and that way makes more sense visually to our brains, I think that trying to navigate a ship into those tight enclosed spaces, given this new reality, doesn't quite work, right? And I think that that's kind of where we kind of hit this creative impasse, if you will, where we have one side where it's, immersion fighting to win, but it's immersion on the other side fighting to win as well, and the reality of the game is trapped somewhere in between. It's like the reality of landing bays versus the reality of the hover system, and they're in conflict whenever you bring your ship into land. Now, while I agree with CIG that there are certain extreme examples that shouldn't be possible, sort of like the fact that some people can or could take their caterpillar, tilt it up on its nose, and then hover it straight up and down like a building and just hang there indefinitely, was kind of ridiculous and silly looking. The truth is, we are dealing with a civilization that, based on how their ships are designed and the way that how their ships are, kind of sold to us, being able to do certain things, that this is a civilization that has tamed gravity. Now, certain ships do have highly evident vertical thrusters, something like the Pioneer here, or also the Reclaimer, which kind of say, okay, no, this ship needs those vertical thrusters, but at times, because maybe they weren't artistically convenient, those vertical thrusters were left off of ships that still should be able to do the same thing. So I think that in certain cases, having those vertical thrusters might account for a faster ascent from the surface of a moon or a planet to space. I don't think that the existence or the lack of those vertical thrusters should just kind of make it so that that ship just cannot operate within, an atmosphere within reason. There are obviously ships in the Star Citizen universe that can land on planets and can land on moons quite easily and navigate, as if they can hover very, very easily, though there's no outward physical evidence that they should be able to do so. You look at something like the Caterpillar, or even something like the Cutlass, with the placement of the thrusters, if they realigned those thrusters to the vertical, it would just tip the ship over on its nose. But I think that there is kind of a middle ground in regards to large ships and small ships, a way to kind of work around this, a way to kind of keep the immersion in place. This is just me brainstorming very quickly and not putting too much time into it, just the last few days. But I think that if you came up with a system where when you kind of deploy your landing gear, you in a way engage a landing mode, which operates off of quantum fuel to a certain degree, the same way the quantum drive does, but what it does is it shifts that to your ship's gravity generators. Obviously, a fighter may not use these all the time since you're strapped into a seat just within the cockpit, but most ships that have an interior that has gravity within it would have this system on more or less all the time. And it would be a system that once you do it, you have a certain amount of time and you have to keep your ship aligned a certain way, so you can't tilt it completely nose up or anything like that. It only works within a certain amount of degrees off of your Z ? Axis, the vertical one. And you can kind of hover the way, you always could hover before, but you only have a certain amount of time to do so, not something like you only have 10 seconds and not like, oh, you have an hour. You know, something comfortable, something fair, something that keeps it interesting to operate within, and something that allows you to operate your ship like it used to, but not indefinitely. Because I can see the point that CIG is trying to make with this system, but at the same time, I don't think it reflects the realities within the game. And I think that in order to kind of come to a middle ground, something that everyone can, agree upon, you're going to have to get a little bit of compromise from both sides, because we are going to get spaceships to a certain extent that don't make sense to a 20th or 21st century brain from our points of reference. But in order to make it work for the realities that Star Citizen is, and in order to make a ship that makes sense and operates within that universe, CIG is going to have to kind of give up a little bit on that hover system to accept the realities of the landing system they've already put in place. But I mean, this is going to be a debate that goes on for quite some time. Anyways, that's my thoughts on the topic. I hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.